You don't need that grade A property necessarily to be a midterm rental.
All right, we're live. Hi, Regan. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me today.
Well, thanks for joining me. The reason I reached out to you is I think doing so well in the midterm rental space specifically. So I just like to invite you to talk about midterm rental in general. So I'm sure the audience can learn so much from you. So before we dive right in, so maybe give us a really general overview of your background, why you decided to kind of dive into this space.
Thank you for having me. I kind of started off being an accidental investor better part of 10 years ago, but my journey with midterm rentals starts before that. Quite a ways before that, actually. Nobody called it midterm rentals at the time. There's still this core group that calls things corporate housing, and there's a lot of similarities and overlap between midterm rentals and corporate housing, but they are two distinct and different things. So, back in the late 90s, when I was working on my master's, I worked for a company called Bridge Street Accommodations, which was one of the first in the space. It kind of evolved at that time and went from temporary housing to corporate housing to what it was being called. But it's essentially short term furnished housing for people that, whatever reason, more often than not, corporate consultant, have a need to be somewhere for less than a typical lease and to have something more similar to hotel type accommodations where you walk in, everything's there, but it's not just a hotel room. You want something bigger than
Home
that.
like.
Exactly, more home-like, that's exactly it, you hit the nail on the head. For me, that was my first exposure to the space back in the late '90s. That was my day job while I was working on my master's. I was in the middle of my hospitality career. Hospitality hours sometimes don't work so well when you have to have a set
Right.
schedule like I did at that time to be available for my classes, so I made kind of a small little turn to the corporate housing space. It was really a great time to be in the space. That time, Y2K consultants were what was keeping us full. It's hard to remember that now because the big thing everybody remembers still is the pandemic, but it's like Y2K,
Right.
there was all this fear the light's going to switch off and not come back on. And thankfully, in some small way, I was able to be a part of that through all the consultants that we housed while they were working to make sure that that didn't happen. It didn't. So that was really nice. Aside from that, we had a lot of other corporate client, even movie crews, things like that. And there are some exciting things that are corporate housing that you might not think about. Like I said, film productions, professional sports are another. I've had the opportunity to house both of those at different times. So there's a lot of things that kind of fall into that arena. I definitely spent an extended number of years not doing anything related to that. And then when I first became an investor around 2014, again, kind of an accidental investor, I just had a good year at the time and decided to put my bonus as a down payment on a property that we built. So we bought the land and then ended up building a property and just were kind of trying to cover costs for my family's lake house at the
Right.
outset. And then it kind of evolved from there. Later ended up doing a 1031 exchange into a couple of different properties. And then somewhere along the way, just like a lot of investors, it was very much a side hustle, if that, I mean, there
Right.
was a time where I had a property manager. I didn't do anything. But then eventually I'm like, I think I could do better than this property manager. And it turned out I could.
You fire them. It's like I can turn this side hustle become like a full blown career.
Yeah, it took a while to go from point A to point B, but finally last year, a year and a couple of months ago, I left my W-2 and I'm, fully focused on investing now. In 2022, I did first get back into midterm rentals, and it was by design. At that time, I had been operating exclusively short-term rentals. We had looked at some long-term rental properties that didn't work out for various reasons, so it was all short-term rentals, and I knew all of the headaches and the weird calls and the demands and all the things that go along with that, and I realized if I'm going to be doing this as a side hustle, I do not need to be dealing with that kind of stuff. And
Mm.
so, having been in the space before, I had the benefit of having that kind of additional knowledge of some of the expectations, some of the personas, some of the different things. As soon as I got into midterm rentals, my side hustle took on a life of its own. And truly, were it not for that, I probably would not be investing full time today.
I'm so glad you share all that because that could really give us a really good understanding how you kind of start as an accidental investor. This just a high side hustle and then kind of turn into this profitable business. I remember on my first conversation with you, I was so amazed because we all know like midterm rental have different kind of, shades and color and flavor, whatever. There's so many. There's corporate housing, like you mentioned. There's insurance displacement, workforce housing, student housing, all that. But you introduced a new idea to me. I never heard it before. It's workforce housing specifically for the construction crew because a lot of time
Mhm.
big development project, you need to have a crew coming in. Sometimes they travel and they stay in there until the job is done. They need to stay for like 3, 4 months until whatever they need to finish the job. Maybe let's talk about a definition of midterm rental. Explain to the audience like what's considered the time range wise we consider that as a midterm rental.
It's a really interesting question because as you start to see how things branch out, there are other things like co-living, which you know well, that technically fall into the midterm rental arena. And so it's kind of one variation of that, but there's so much variation. So I've become kind of a student of midterm rental because I've tried so many different things and I've seen kind of what's at the periphery of that, right? Like if you're
Right.
operating what you intend to be a midterm rental, which the definition of that is 30 days and up, 1 to however many months stays, typically under a year, but I've had several that have gone over a year. So you kind of look at what's on both ends of that. So your intent is to have people for at least a month. But if
Right.
you have a property that's in a municipality that allows you to take shorter stays, it sure is nice to have that capability to have those gap stays. So typically your stay might be between 1 and 12 months, but sometimes
Mm.
it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. In my experience, the typical stay is closer to the 4 to 5 month range, but that's looking at all things considered. I've had folks stay for a couple of nights as gap stays between longer stays.
Right.
And I have one guest with me now that is in their second year. They'll be committed for 2 full years and will probably extend again. So you
Yeah, they
just
like
never
it. They
know.
want to stay long term. So
Absolutely.
the municipality you just mentioned, right? That's also great information to find out when we try to dive into a new market. Because a lot of time,
100%.
some market might consider 90 days as a short term rental because the municipality law and regulation with the
Mhm.
Airbnb. So anything less than 90 days consider short term rental. You can house them, consider those a mid term rental, but on the other flip side, they might have to get a short term rental license because it's still within 90 days, right?
It is so different from one municipality to the next. It could be just about anything. There are a lot of municipalities that actually don't even define. They'll say they don't allow short-term rental, but they don't define what that is.
Oh, I
So I've had to
noticed.
get on the phone with
You have to
multiple
call them.
what is the shortest stay that's not a short-term rental? And oftentimes they don't know. I've had to get on the phone with the city attorney before with all these different things. And so I've seen it be anywhere from 14 days to 1 year and everywhere in
Right.
between.
Everybody has
I
a different idea.
yeah, 30 days is most typical. That's what I've seen
I
is
would agree.
typical, but you cannot assume anything, especially homeowners associations are an entirely different animal. But aside from what's considered a short-term stay, there's also taxation that could be different from one municipality or state to the next. So I had a property in the panhandle of Florida at 1 month. At one point, I could accommodate any length of stay. So that was fine and great. But anything under a 6 month stay had a certain tax that they paid. They didn't pay all the other taxes. If it was over 30 days, but under 6 months, they had to pay this. I forget how many percent it is. It's not a lot, but of course, there's a lot of snowbirds in Florida. So they don't want to miss out on that. They don't have state's income tax there. So there are things like that that you really need to know what you're dealing with. It's interesting because this has never come up before, but there's a lot of different places you can check about the different regulations, about taxes, about all of those things. And I usually check multiple sources and call the municipality directly because you can't just trust everything you read. From a taxation perspective, I use a company called Avalara My Lodge Tax. It's Avalara, and they have other financial things that they do, but you can go to their website and type in the address and it'll tell you the tax that applies in that particular municipality
Mm.
because there are a lot of different layered taxes. They might call it a sales and use tax. They might call it just a regular sales tax. It could be like there's different convention and visitors bureaus that layer in. And like I mentioned, the example of this additional one in the state of Florida. And I know there are a couple of other states that have things like that. So you need to be really sure about what you're doing because if you end up getting penalties and then they go retro for something you've been doing for a long time, literally that could put you out of business, not to scare people, but no joke.
Right.
Like that's for real. Like a lot of the municipalities, what they do, if you do something shorter than the term they allow, that what I've seen to be kind of the norm norm on that is $1,000 a night. So nobody wants to mess with that. You want to know
Oh.
on the front end what you're
Yeah.
dealing with.
Yeah, we'll definitely ask you to give us that link so I can post on the
For sure.
description so people can look into that. That's a great point because I've noticed that if you don't budget for that, you would think you're making a bank, but then in the end of the day, you have to pay so much more taxes.
And the good
So
news is a lot of it's integrated, like with Airbnb in particular. They know what the regulations are. It's not every city or every municipality, but a lot of the larger ones they know.
right.
Chicago, Philadelphia, ones like that. When it comes to different taxes, they vary dramatically from municipality to state by county. There are multiple layers to it. The other thing that I like about Avalara is that they get your business license for you, which that's one of those things a lot of people don't even think about, that you need a business license. Literally, a lot of places you have to have that little printed out license that you have in a frame somewhere on site in the property. So it just helps you not have unpleasant surprises. And I'm just one that likes to not have to worry about things like that. I think it's like $27 per property per month they deal with filing it. And it can be different depending on, like, if you book through Airbnb, then they collect those taxes. Verbo does in some places and doesn't in other places. They don't in most places. And if you have a direct booking website and you take anything that's shorter than whatever the period is. So there's just a lot of stuff, and I don't want to have to worry about that. So it's just one of those little things that you can outsource.
If you don't budget it out
Mhm.
before the year end, then you might think you're making a profit, you're killing it, you're making bank, but then you have to end up cutting a big check and penalty as well. Like you said, like legal consequences of like not having license, you're operating a business like illegally, they can come back at you. Wow, that sounds
Mhm.
pretty serious. So yeah, we definitely will share that website in the description.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about why midterm rental is such a good opportunity. Any pros and cons?
Like we talked about, there's a lot of things that fall within the arena. And as you mentioned, I found myself very drawn to workforce housing over the last 6 months to a year or so. In fact, there was a time where people I knew in the space were dealing a lot with workforce housing. And I had this misperception in my head that they might be harder on a property. But the reality is, myself, my family with 2 dogs and 2 kids are equally hard on most properties as, any kind of construction crew that comes in. And more often than not, it's related to their work. And so people are going to be on their best behavior and not leave a mess behind because they don't want to have an impact from that. I hear from all types of work crews. I heard from a solar work crew today. I've dealt with some other ones in the past. There are a lot of excavation, electrical. Electrical is huge. Those subcontractors working on long-term projects, as you and I know and have talked about, there's a data center boom that's going on in our country
Right.
and beyond. And when you start to see the different trades that are coming in at different points in a project, and then in many cases, you have your GCs and the project managers, project executives that are there for the entire thing. It's not unusual for that to span 10 years.
I like how you talk about like they may not be as hard on the property because the way I look at it is they're working so hard throughout the day. When they come home, they just want to sleep and watch the TV and
Absolutely.
chill, have some beer. Like they're not gonna like damage things. They just need a comfortable, clean house to stay.
Exactly.
It's remind me of during my old day when I was still a student. I've seen these doctors and they rotate. If they just got so tired because they work long hours. All they are asking for is any good furnished place that's within walking distance,
Yep.
safe for them to go and sleep because they literally have like maybe 3 4 hours of sleep time and they gotta go back and then grind it again. So I'm just thinking it's very similar.
And those are the kind of things you need to think about. Who's the persona who you think you'll be accommodating when you outfit a property? Because if you're dealing with a corporate executive who's expecting something more on par with a four-star hotel, then you're going to set things up differently than you would for someone with the scenario that you just described. And one of the things I like to do is let people know that we do have flexibility with all of those things. So here's our standard setup. Maybe if it's a 2 bedroom, there's a queen in one bedroom and 2 twins in the other, or maybe there's 2 queens. We're always happy to change that based on whatever your particular need is. And a lot of other things that go down the line. Depending on who I have in a property, I've started going more towards gray sheets instead of white sheets that I've used because you just start to see how you're going through a lot more towels, linen sheets, those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand who your target audience is so that you can outfit things according to what they're looking for, because there are a lot of people that fit in that category. It could be all varieties of travel medical professionals. It's not just travel nurses, it's occupational therapy, it's social workers, it's interns doing rotations, residents doing rotations. I can think of several different medical folks that I saw today alone. If you're close to a medical school, especially, I mean, you get a lot of of that. They kind of have that common denominator of just wanting simple, clean, safe. And so that also impacts on the properties that you might be looking at to set up as a midterm rental, because you don't need that grade A property necessarily to be a midterm rental. I mean, there are certain cases that that's appropriate for, but obviously that impacts the price that you have to charge. There's a really large middle ground that just needs safe, clean, simple accommodations.
Yeah, so locations obviously is the key, right? And also you kind of have to outfit the property based on your client. The clientele determine how they like the house to be. My understanding of the midterm rental, it always have much better cash flow compared to long-term rental, right? So I know there are so many different platforms. One thing I know about is the Furnish Finder. That I think that seems to be everybody who know about. So when you try to figure out how to comp the midterm rental rate or just figure out if this is even a good market, good location, what would be your advice?
Well, I will tell you in my experience, almost every location has the potential to be good for midterm rental. And there are people that might disagree with that, but I've seen so many properties and locations and scenarios. The thing that I think distinguishes midterm rental more than anything else is the fact that it's such a relationship game. You have to know who are the local businesses, what is the economic development profile of what's going on, how many people are moving in versus moving out, what are some of the big projects that are underway over the next X number of years, what are the colleges, hospitals, hotels, headquarters of businesses. The H's tend to be important, but you can also look at hotels, especially suite hotels, because they spend a lot of money on doing studies to see that there's demand to justify that being there. If you see a suite hotel in a location, it's not an accident. I guarantee you that. So that lets you know that you're in a pretty good location. If you're close to major highways, especially the intersection of those highways, then that's a really great place to be as well. I find that most folks are looking to be within around a 20-minute radius or commute. Some people 15, some people 30, but let's say 20 on average. If you're at the intersection of two major highways, and I'd have some properties that are like that, you can serve a larger area because it's so easy to get there. But if you're dealing with an insurance displaced family that has three kids in three different schools, then they don't want to drive 20 minutes because that's an absolute logistical nightmare. So it's a much smaller area that they're looking at. You have to be your own boots on the ground or have someone else that will do that and understand who the people are that are coming for longer term stays. And a lot of times it's just paying attention and seeing what's going on. I rarely drive by a construction trailer. I almost always stop in and see what's going on and who's working there. Because yes, there are some people that will be there for the long haul. Maybe it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But even for those who aren't there for the long haul, there's a certain repeatable series of trades that come in at different points in the process. And so many of them are traveling. A lot of them are traveling and getting a per diem. A lot of times they're making their own arrangements. That makes it a little bit trickier, but if you find the right ways to get to those people, because a lot of the companies that they're working for just give them a per diem and say, hey, we're not in the housing business, but they get roommates and they work,
Like a voucher, use this, will compensate you for your living expenses. Yeah, you just give me a good idea, like, because you think about like this rotating kind of situation, right? A lot of trainee type of opportunity, military bases, that
oh yeah.
opportunity, right? Hospital, because they always have rotation going on, different students trying to rotate through the medical school training, residency, and all that. That's like rotation basis. And do you usually just do a drive by or at least look on the Google map to see like if there's any Hilton suite around, that's scouting on the map to figure it out?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely looking at it, whether, if you're in person, of course, you'll see it. But if you're looking at a remote market, and then you mentioned, medical schools, many medical schools, a number that I've dealt with, either have their own website or a Facebook group or something like that, where they're publishing and sharing off campus housing. The same thing holds true for off base housing for military installations. Every military installation is different as far as what their mix and availability of housing is. They get housing allowances. They may be doing TDY and have something that's going to be longer.
What's that TDY?
It's temporary duty. And
Okay.
if they're traveling on their own or if they have their family with them, that will determine what allowance they might get. It's a universal housing allowance. There's so many rabbit holes you can go down. You just need to know what's in your backyard. That's why I say that midterm rental can work almost anywhere, but it doesn't mean it's easy. You've got to do the work and figure out who it is that you're dealing with. But it can also be as simple as knocking on your local real estate agent's door, because when someone is displaced due to an insurance claim, they will get involved in the mix somewhere along the way. The local agent isn't often super involved, but they will be kind of handling the customer service with their client. client because it'll be an adjuster usually that's involved in that. But they do have that ability to make some recommendations. Another thing you can do is really get involved with the restoration companies in your area because they're usually the first people in that house before the lengthy process that can happen between point A and point B. It can be weeks, a month, multiple months before someone gets into proper housing, depending on what happened in their home. Either they are staying in their permanent home while things are getting figured out. Like I've lived this, I've had it happen myself. It was a couple of months before I got moved into temporary housing. In other cases where it's something more catastrophic in nature, then they'll probably be in a hotel, which sounds really fun until you've done it for a couple of days with kids and dogs and all those sorts of things.
What would be a better way to find out how much we could get for renting it to midterm rental? I know insurance displacement is another thing. Like
Right.
it's not through negotiation. That's how I learned.
Yeah.
I was shocked how much I would be making renting to family covered by insurance displacement. But in terms of like additional spread, like how much more percentage wise people can typically get through midterm rental with different type of client.
It's interesting because I've found that there are a lot of tools that people use and they'll say regular long-term rental is this, short term is this, midterm is that, and they use a formula. That's a guess at best. I mean, comping is always challenging, right? Because you can look at properties that are similar size close by that are not similar. They can have varying degrees of finishes. Let's say you had two houses built in the 70s that were a couple blocks apart, but one's renovated, one's not renovated. So you have to really dig deep and take a look at what's going on in that hyper local market to really understand. And saturation comes into play as well. There are a lot of markets that have a lot of demand for midterm rentals, but they don't have a lot that's available. I have one property that's in a situation like that, that it's a property that a lot of people in this area probably would not rent. Not that there's anything quote unquote wrong with it, but it just doesn't have some of the amenities that they're accustomed to, but there's not much available. So they settle for that. There are a lot of things that come into play, and you really do have to kind of geek out on what's going on within a couple of blocks. Just like you would underwrite a property, and you have to really go deep with looking at your comps if you want to be able to trust them. The same thing holds true here, but it also is tricky because many people are familiar with Price Labs. I'm a huge Price Labs fan, and they have a tool called Market Dashboards that you can really take a good look. You can get into a lot of configurations and look at your competitive set. There's a lot of things that define that competitive set. You can look at that, but it's also one-sided data because it's heavily skewed towards what happens on Airbnb, and it's
Correct.
historical and it's real, and they get a little bit of verbo in there.
I used Price Lab before when I try to comp a property to decide if that's a good buy for Airbnb short-term rental perspectives. Market dashboard is helpful, but I agree with you, right? There's multiple factors. It's an art to comp the property, like condition, location,
Mhm.
supply and demand, right? All come into place. The database in the end is just a database. There's also plus minus that we have to deal with.
So, I think it's impossible for it to be perfect other than, if it's a market that you know really well. There are certain markets that I operate in that I know very well. I mean, there have been times where I had three properties within 5 to 10 minutes of each other. And I am a big fan of clustering properties for that reason, because if you build those relationships, why not leverage those more broadly? But also, it makes it very easy when someone inquires with you about a particular property. It's often booked for months at a time. And so it gives you that opportunity to say, well, that property's not available, but I have this one 5 minutes away that's coming up in 3 weeks. That's probably not perfect, but is it an option? A lot of times it is. Things like that that you can do to really take advantage of that hard work that you're already doing and getting to know an area intimately.
I believe you work with a couple of different big database company, right? I think ALE Solutions, one of the big one. How many company you build a relationship with?
Well, there's different ways that that all happens. So with ALE, we are a preferred corporate partner. So that's kind of a different relationship, but they have a database that anyone can put a property in. And the same thing is true with Alacrity Solutions. And there's a lot of insurance housing agencies now. There's a lot of small ones that have come up over the last few years as well. So they're not all just the big ones. Honestly, I'm constantly learning about new ones. And one of the things I've started doing is when I get an inquiry from someone that I've never heard of before, I try to find out what's going on with that and can I do the same thing and kind of reciprocity putting my properties in their database. Because really the question is, who does it come through? And they all have different relationships with different insurers. TRS is another big one. I've personally not had as much business with them, but for me personally, Alacrity is where I've have gotten more business than any other insurance housing agency. A lot of it is where the properties are located. A lot of it is once you get an inquiry from them, really going above and beyond and doing a great job and then building a good reputation for yourself within that particular company. And then you'll find you start to hear from them again and again. And a lot of times I'll hear from some of the big ones that I have really strong relationships with for places that I don't even have properties just because they heard my name from someone.
Ah, I see. Yeah, because I think my first MTR request came through CRS.
Mhm.
And we can probably talk about like how do we negotiate with those companies? Because I was surprised there were so many where you can add like additional fees and
Mhm.
non-refundable deposits, stuff like that. You can negotiate with them upfront. So that all came in the back end become your profit. My first request came in. I was able to ask for like 3 grand of the deposit and then I can cap the utility allowance and there
Mhm.
was non-refundable pet fee. There's also like admin fee. And I mean, I have somebody else just like you, like help me negotiate, I guess, to submit the application and get as much fee we could get. So walk us through a little bit of how the process works. From there's an inquiry coming through your database and until you help match your client with those companies.
So, I don't consider people in my database to be my client. They're people that we partner with. I started off focusing on my own properties, and those are what you call core inventory. Those are your own properties that you have set up, and you need to keep them as full as possible. And then there's other things kind of on the periphery of that. One is new setups when you don't have anything available that works for a need, but you want to be able to offer something to your client. So the client would be, I consider the person who's paying for the housing. As far as the database goes, in our own database, we do have others have the ability to add their properties so that when we have a housing request where I don't have my own property there, but I'd like to be able to offer something, then we'll check and see if their property is available. And there's different ways that people handle this, but the way that I do it today is that we just sublease the property. And so what we would do is we would lease from the partner who has the property in the database and then lease to our client. And so there's a markup in there, of course, a cost of doing business. You have to do that in order to be able to stay in business, but then we take over a lot of those responsibilities. So we deal with the paperwork, we deal with the communications, and I just prefer to handle it that way because all of our clients are important to us, but especially the ones that are our bread and butter that we get the most of our demand from. And I would prefer to be in the middle of any communication that takes place. So if a service call is needed for a HVAC, or if the hot water isn't working, or the internet went out, or whatever it is, I would rather know about that and be able to be a part of managing it. Basically, the way that works is we just kind of go through a matching process. And so when we get a request from one of our clients, we check and see what's available in the area that's a match, that's within reasonable distance, that's the right number of bedrooms, oftentimes the right budget. A lot of times just isn't available. We find quite a bit of that, which is why we also do a lot of new setups. Typically, for the most part, we do setups for 6 months and up stays, but we can do them for as little as 3 months. All that is we'll go out and source a new property to set up. A lot of times it might be an apartment as opposed to a single family home. We'll get rental furniture put in. What I like to do when I do a new setup for a client is I kind of use that as an opportunity to gauge demand in the area in a low risk kind of way. So once I have that property at the end of the stay that the new setup was for, I'll go ahead and set that up in some of the other platforms where we publish properties, whether it's Airbnb, Verbo, Zillow, Facebook Marketplace, other databases, you name it. I go ahead and put it there and see like what's coming in, what kind of interest are we getting in that property. And I've done that before where, okay, hey, there's consistent demand coming in here. So I'll just go ahead and extend that now that I've got it set up. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. I think being flexible and kind of understanding some of the different levers and understanding that you've got people on both sides of the transaction. You've got the supply, which is housing, which you could get from someone that's already in your database from your own properties, or you could source new properties as needed. And then the other side of that is the client, whoever's paying for the stay. There's a lot of ways to make all of that come together.
I think you just throwing that genius idea. Like, most people don't think about like even if you don't own the property, you can subleasing, which is also a lower risk of getting in this market, kind of test the water. Because you can commit into maybe like a 2 year, 3 years lease with a landlord who own the property, and then you kind of subleasing that out for a mid-term rental client and make the spread. We're talking about doing that, experimenting that in Arizona as well, because
Right.
that the TSMC is gonna be continue building their chip factory there. Like, it makes sense that that could be a booming market in the foreseeable future, right? So that's a great idea that most people didn't even think about. Like, they need to have a house to run a midterm rental, but not necessary. True.
Absolutely, and leasing something from an apartment community, especially a townhouse. I like townhouses a lot because they're that middle ground where it feels more like a house, but you can rent one from an apartment community. They're much more likely to do something for a short-term lease and to offer you that flexibility, and it's exactly like what you said, because whenever we do eventually do that, that will be kind of a clickbait almost, because at that point, then we'll really start to see what demand's coming through, and that can turn into that clustering
Test
of
the water.
properties.
Yeah.
Exactly, because when you see like, wow, there is really consistent demand coming in, and there are a handful of markets I can tell you that I know that that's the case. Can't do it all, but
Mhm.
once you see the proof is in the pudding that you're getting way, way, way more requests than you're able to fulfill, then it's time to add another property and add another property and add another property. And you also start to get a feel for some of the gory details of what they're looking for. Like, okay, we have a two-bedroom, but we're getting a lot of one-bedroom requests, or we're getting a lot of three-bedroom requests. And you start to get the feel for who are the people and what are the things they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, right, in addition to like condo, also like apartment building, they have great amenity as well.
Yeah.
I would say it would be great to pick something that's closer to everything. They have additional amenity come into play, like pool.
You just don't know, and I can think of even when I've been housing families that were doing renovations that are coming from a single family home and made a conscious decision to stay in an apartment because they wanted their kids to have a pool to swim in over the summer. That's taking lemons and making lemonade. So people have all kinds of drivers that come into it, and that's again where it's really important to get to know the people that you're working with and understand. Don't be afraid to ask, like, what's important to you? What are the things that you're looking for so that we can make sure and put you in the right property?
Well, the more I talk to you about everything, I just realized that it's really a good benefit of working with somebody like you who was being in the trenches and
Mhm.
experimenting a lot of different type of thing and to figure out what not working. Like you can kind of save people from making a lot of mistakes and shorten their learning curve. What are the things that you could do to ask the right question to help get the perfect tenant?
A lot of it is asking the right question, but there are so many things that don't come out in that. And so it makes you realize more and more being very, very specific in your property descriptions. If you have a property, you might want to gloss over the things that make it not ideal, but at the same time, you want to be really transparent about that. If it's a really loud road, it's good to just go ahead and say that because some people that will matter to, some people that won't matter to. You're better off knowing that whoever is coming into that property knows what they're getting. Another thing that I do is aside from photos, I also do walkthrough videos and I do them literally walking through the front door so people can see this is the flow of how everything fits together. And sometimes I'll even go beyond that and get these 3D renderings that I'll go on Fiverr. I have a couple people that have done that for me and they show the flow of how each of the bedrooms fits together. There are things you cannot see in photos that have a real impact when you're staying in a property for months at a time. So, for example, a lot of people don't want a bedroom that shares a wall with their kids' bedroom. There are different hours they're asleep, things like that. So, by doing things like a walkthrough and those renderings, people can get a much clearer understanding of what the property is like. It's a little more of a mixed bag with midterm rentals as far as some people do walk the property before they come in for a rental and some don't. I mean, I've had people come expats from other countries, and so it helps give people the comfort that they have a very clear.
Assurance. Yeah.
Exactly. Clear idea of what they're stepping into. So, as far as asking questions, it varies as far as when you get a sense of who you'll be renting to. More often than not, I get a better sense through the questions that people ask me than the questions that I ask them. There's someone that's going to be moving into a property sometime soon, and I've gotten questions from all the way to should I bring coffee filters to do you have a rolling desk at the desk chair? Very long list. And clearly she's anxious about the house renovation that's going on, but it's like, if it's whatever little thing it is that she's worried about, it's like, it's going to be okay. I promise.
Is the pillow scented?
Yeah,
Is that the wall has
exactly.
lavender color, this shape of gray? Like, that's a great point because sometimes the people who ask a lot of question, but some of the requests are a little bit more unrealistic or attention to detail to a point that's not typical. That's
Yeah.
a good indicator.
And, you have to be comfortable. I mean, you have to find that right balance because this is a hospitality business and, you want to treat it as such. It's also important to be as clear as possible about what you're providing. And I've even gotten to the point where I say, we have a drip coffee maker. It's not a Keurig. Even one of my things is we do stainless steel pots and pans. We don't do nonstick because people just scratch them and you have to replace them every single time. Some people don't like that, but that's the reason that we do it that way. So if you're as clear as possible, I even open the cabinets and take pictures, the pots and pans and things inside so they can see this is well stocked. This is the type of thing that's in here. Be as descriptive as you can. And honestly, it's good for SEO anyway. Talk about this is an ensuite bath. This connects to this other room. This has good light in the afternoon. This opens straight out onto the fully fenced backyard and give people as clear of a picture as you can of what they're getting. I actually have properties that in the description say this is a charming old house, but the floors creak. And they do. So they know that's what
I
they're
love
getting.
that. You have it, you give it a little spin so
Mhm.
people like chuckle about it.
And they'll self-select out if that's not what they want. But yes, there will be those high maintenance situations. And so that is where you have to find that balance of accommodating what's reasonable, but also saying, this is what we've offered. We've been very transparent about that. If you would like to do anything else, of course, you're more than welcome to do that within, certain limitations. Certainly feel free to supplement with whatever you would like, but this is what we provide.
Yeah, I like that approach. You knew this, you walked this, you're fully aware of all the disclosure that we give it to you. If you don't like it, feel free to make some adjustment. Purchase additional pen,
Yeah, exactly.
non-stick one, and
And
take it with you
people
when you
do,
when
some
you
people
leave.
want a rice cooker, some people want a wok,
Right.
some people want,
Air fryer.
yeah, exactly, whatever it is, or some people, they don't want a drip coffee maker, they want a Keurig. Some people want a tortilla press. So, certainly you can supplement it with whatever it is that you're looking for. People will ask for other things. One other small thing that I include in descriptions is that we provide a starter supply of consumables. We are not replenishing those throughout your entire stay. And I've had people ask for, 6 month stays. Oh, we need more cleaning supplies. Like, nope, we got enough to get you started, but then you need to go to the grocery
Yeah, you need
store.
to replace. So that kind of got me thinking. I assume you have like some sort of moving instruction. These are explained in the moving instruction or any
Yes.
sort of like a house rule or something like that.
We have a boilerplate guidebook that we use and we customize for each property, and it includes everything from Wi-Fi instructions to what the trash day is to where's the washer and dryer located, all of those sorts of little things. And we do our best to answer all of the questions proactively. But of course, when people have questions, then we'll answer those. But we also set expectations there that if it's outside of business hours, we will answer certain urgency of questions. But if it's at 10 o'clock at night, we're probably not going to be answering the question about fill in the blank, whatever it is.
I like that. Let me kind of dive into that, ask you a little bit further, because I just have that recent experience with the tenant as well. Because you want to state the boundary, right? You want to be poor, but you don't want them to bug you after hour. How did you funnel those calls? Do you kind of route it to a third party answering, and then you just tell them like, all right, we'll troubleshoot, we'll deal with it based on the urgency?
That's a good question. This is in flux, but honestly, it's constantly been in flux because I've tried a lot of different things. We have a couple of different systems that we use that include messaging. We have in our email signature and other different places kind of set that boundary of these are our normal office hours and we'll reply to urgent things outside those office hours. Right now, I don't have 24/7 people like actually picking up the phone other than my core team, but I have had that fluctuate at different times. And you kind of have to see what the rhythms are with your business and what's the actual volume of calls coming through and is that justified. But I do know people that do have people 24/7 that are sitting there waiting. There are some things with AI that I'm looking at right now, like voice AI. I've been evaluating a couple of different things. So we're not really settled on what we're doing there, but there are also some maintenance services. There are several different ones actually that will pick up the phone. And you just have to really know your clientele and understand what's needed there. We're just kind of handling it through automated messaging in a variety of different systems, depending on where they booked, that sort of thing. And then I have one VA to a couple of VAs that help monitor that. And depending on what's going on, they're trained with how to deal with different situations.
Oh, I like that. So you have more like a VA virtual assistant to help watching the queue basically, and you
Yeah.
have a assistant to capture all the. I like the messaging system because what I learned is that if you make yourself too available and they start texting, calling you off.
Oh, yeah.
I
No.
just recently learned from that. I was like, you know what? I need to pull back. Was that demanding guest that we were talking
Mhm.
about. When did I have to kind of pull back to answer in a more property management team's perspective? It's just
Mhm.
one person. Every time she call me and text me and I stop answering, I say, hey, please write your request to this email. I'm thinking about setting up a separate, like a message queue. People just text to that, and
Mhm.
then there's a timestamp, like when it was received. And what I need to learn about how to structure my email. Maybe I'll reach out to you after this call. Like, how do you structure your email so you have like a off hours, what to expect? That was so good, Reagan.
Well, it's continuous improvement too. I mean, we're constantly iterating little things that we're doing and setting those expectations. There are certain things that are an emergency. No hot water is considered an emergency by most people's standards, but there, I mean, there's different ways that you would respond to something like that as
Right.
opposed to some of the types requests that I think that you may have been getting from some of the tenants that you mentioned. I do think just setting that expectation is really important. That's something that can be put in a property guidebook. Very clear. I use bold, highlighting, all caps, things like that quite extensively to try to draw attention to the most important things. Here are the things that we consider emergencies. Here are the things that we respond service level agreements within a certain period of time. Here are some other things that will respond the next business day.
Well, I think that's a good time for us to wrap this out. You have dropped so many nuggets. I don't even know where to start. So, what's next for you? How can people reach out to you for collaboration? How can they do business with you?
Sure. The what's next? That's a really good question. I'm always, dealing with a number of different projects that relate in one way or another to midterm rental, but also more broadly. I've got several things in the works right now, a lot of it multifamily. One is kind of a vertically integrated home services business that is not launched yet, but we're still getting some things lined up. As far as to reach me, I do have my business website, which is turnkeycorporatehousing.com. I also have my website where I have workshops. I don't have my next workshop scheduled right now, but you can complete the form there to get on the list to get information and updates when I have the next workshop coming up. And I do also host weekly office hours actually on Wednesdays at noon central. That's open to the public. So I'll get you the link for that so you can share that in the description. Anyone is welcome to join. And that's when I make myself available. It's almost every week. Occasionally there will be a schedule conflict and we go to the next week. Whatever midterm rental questions people have, happy to answer those during that time. A lot of times we have all kinds of scenarios that people bring, but regansonnabend.com is my personal website. Again, turnkeycorporatehousing.com is the business website. So if you'd like to add your property to our database, or if you have a housing request, any of those things, I've got forms there and all sorts of resources and information.
Wow. Yeah, definitely we'll include all the link that you just mentioned in the description. Also, encourage everybody to sign up, join the wait list for your next workshop. I think last time when I joined, it was so much value. I learned a lot how to work with the guests, how to identify, how to come, and it's just so much value. So, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming to my podcast today. And I look forward to our future opportunities together.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it as well.